Each spring, about 80 to 100 sage grouse come to mate on a large flat in the upper Pahsimeroi River Valley near Challis. After mating season, the hens raise their broods on state and federal land in the Donkey Hills and take them across a dirt road into a spacious wet meadow on private ranch land to raise their young. The Goldberg Meadow belongs to rancher Tom Page, who is making a number of improvements to benefit sage grouse and other wildlife such as curlews and antelope. A new livestock management plan delays the time when cattle move onto the meadow, leaving it available for sage grouse and other wildlife at a critical time of year. He's also installed 10,000 feet of wildlife-friendly fence around the perimeter of the property. Rosanna Reith explains.
The fence itself, to be wildlife-friendly, is 42 inches high. There's 12 inches between the top wire and the second wire, and then the bottom wire is 16 inches from the ground surface, and it's smooth wire to allow antelope to go underneath the fence. And then we also marked 10,000 feet of this fence with sage grouse fence markers, and they're just made out of vinyl siding, and they are spaced at 3 feet apart.
The reflective markers on the top wire are the product of University of Idaho graduate student Brian Stevens' work.
It's been documented that fence strikes are a significant risk to sage grouse mortality. These markers increase the visibility of that top wire.
By changing the fence and moving it over there.
Rancher Tom Page has a deep background in land conservation work. You might say he's a conservationist first and a rancher second. In the late 2000s, he bought several ranches in the Pahsimeroi Valley because of the conservation opportunities that existed in the area. He's working on multiple projects to benefit sage grouse in partnership with the NRCS as part of the Sage Grouse Initiative. He's also working on conservation projects to improve water flows for endangered salmon and steelhead.
Right now, it's easier to do conservation on private lands, quite frankly. I love working with SGI. I mean, the flexibility, again, to me is the really great thing. That it can be about fencing, it can be about roads, it can be about funding for an easement, which has more to do with the management itself of the property. I like also that SGI program works effectively with the federal lands and the state agencies as well.
Page is a big supporter of all lands management, where you manage multiple ownerships as a whole. That way, initiatives to benefit fish, wildlife, and rangelands can occur seamlessly from private lands to public lands. Conservation initiatives to benefit sage grouse and wildlife in the Goldberg Meadow are a perfect example of how all lands management works. Page keeps his cattle grazing on state land grazing allotments above the private meadow in the spring when the wildlife are raising young. And then he uses solar fence to set up multiple pastures inside the meadow to manage livestock grazing after the cattle move in. The results are looking good so far.
The more I'm up here, the more little things I see happen that are pretty neat. For instance, the antelope didn't used to fawn here. I've seen more and more elk show up in here. The curlews, you just spend time up here and you realize it's pretty awesome.
By fencing off a spring in the Goldberg Meadow, Page is seeing more sage grouse using the area too.
Grave Spring, just above us there, had not run prior to 2010 for about 30 years. The sage grouse loved it in here in the last few years. This is one of the spots you can almost always find them late in the summer. I've had days where I've seen 30 or 40. It varies. You know, usually you'll come in here when you do see them and you'll see 8 or 10.
About 15 miles down valley, Page teamed up with the NRCS and SGI to remove 29,000 feet of old sheep fence on the 475-acre Grouse Creek Ranch property. This is another example of the all lands management concept. The private parcel is surrounded by a 35,000-acre BLM grazing allotment.
So the project does a couple things. By taking the fence out, obviously good for sage grouse, you know, with the lek nearby, but also Operationally, it'll allow this private land and this well and tank to be used by the permittees.
By developing the water source for livestock, it will keep the cattle grazing in the uplands in the fall. This will keep cattle away from the Pahsimeroi River when the salmon are spawning. Page expects to donate the 475-acre Grouse Creek property to the Lemhi Regional Land Trust in 2015, but he will retain the grazing privileges. He also has finalized 3 conservation easements with the Nature Conservancy regarding the management of his ranch property in the Pahsimeroi Valley, and he's working on a 4th conservation easement with NRCS regarding the Goldberg property. The easements codify conservation measures that have been implemented so they continue in perpetuity.
I think the easements will yield sort of changes that we've already started to institute. You sort of need 5 or 10 years after you do them to say, did we get success?
Big Creek Ranches is one of 10 members of the Central Idaho Rangelands Network, an ad hoc group of conservation-minded ranchers in central Idaho. Page sees the network as being helpful in pushing for more conservation gains and innovative management on federal lands.
Okay, we do all this great stuff on the private lands, and it's integrated with all the state and BLM, but if we don't sort of have a sense of how the state and the BLM is going to be operated in the future, you know, is that a really good long-term investment in private lands and managing them well?
The network of ranchers collectively control about 80,000 acres of private land and about 1.5 million acres of state and federal land.
I think one of the things we have going for us is strength in numbers. But if you have 9 guys who've done really good stuff on their private lands and they control, you know, over 1 million acres of federal and state grazing permits, to say, hey, we support this collectively, this idea, I think the agencies, they listen more.